I got separated from my unit during a retreat through the Ardennes forest. It was December 1944, and I'd been fighting with the 101st Airborne for 11 months. One minute I was following Sergeant Roger through the snow. The next, I was alone in fog so thick I couldn't see 20 feet ahead. The sounds of battle, the shouting, the gunfire, faded until all I heard was my own breathing and the crunch of my boots on frozen ground. I kept moving through the white haze, my rifle ready. Every so often, I'd come across a body in the snow. Each time I'd stop, kneel down, press my fingers against cold necks looking for a pulse that was never there. Some wore American uniforms, some German. I took dog tags from our guys when I found them. Someone would need to write letters home. My compass went crazy in my palm, the needle jerking in different directions like it was drunk. I tapped it, shook it, cursed at it. Nothing helped. The fog seemed to mess with direction, with time, with everything. I stopped behind a fallen oak and dug through my pack, counting what little I had left. Food for maybe 2 days if I was careful. Half a canteen of water sloshing weakly when I shook it. 30 rounds of ammunition for my M1. Not great odds if I ran into trouble. But I'd seen guys make it with less. The gray sky darkened as evening came on. The temperature dropped even further, the kind of cold that makes your lungs burn with each breath. I needed shelter before full dark or I'd freeze to death. I found a small clearing surrounded by dense pines and started digging into the snow, trying to make a windbreak with my entrenching tool. My hands were stiff and awkward from cold, and the frozen ground fought against each stroke. "You shouldn't stay here." I spun around, bringing my rifle up in one smooth motion, the way they'd drilled into us since basic. A thin American soldier stood at the edge of the clearing, just watching me. "German patrols come through this area." His voice was soft, almost too quiet. "Every night." I kept my rifle trained on him while my eyes worked over the details. His uniform was American, but something wasn't right about it. Most striking, though, were his feet. He had no boots. Just bare, blue-tinged feet in the snow. Yet he stood there easy as if he was on a beach in July. No shivering, no signs the cold bothered him at all. "Name and rank," I said, not lowering my weapon. "Corporal Ryden Rios, 506th, he replied. "You can put that rifle down. We're on the same side." "What happened to your boots?" I asked, my aim steady. "Lost them crossing a river 2 days back," he said with a small shrug. "The current was stronger than I expected." I'd seen what happened to men with exposure. 2 days in this weather with bare feet, he should have been dead, or at least missing some toes. The feet should be black, not blue. Everything inside me said to get away from this guy. But night was coming fast. I was alone in enemy territory with no idea which way led back to friendly lines. I slowly lowered my rifle, keeping my finger near the trigger. "You know the way back to our lines?" I asked. "I can get you somewhere safe for the night," he said. "Tomorrow we can try to find your unit." I nodded and gathered my gear. My gut said to run, but my training said survival meant finding other Americans, even strange ones. I decided to follow him. He moved ahead of me through the trees, and that's when I noticed how he walked, completely silent. No crunching in the snow, no snapping twigs, nothing. I tried to step exactly where he stepped, but still made noise with every footfall. It was like he wasn't touching the ground at all. We walked for about an hour. The forest got darker, the spaces between trees black as pitch. The cold bit deeper. "Here," Ryden said suddenly, stopping at what looked like a small hole in the ground. It was a foxhole, about 4 feet deep and 5 feet across. Someone had dug it recently. There was a military-issue shovel stuck in the dirt nearby. "We can rest here for the night," Ryden said, dropping down into the hole. "It's as safe as anywhere in these woods." I climbed in after him, but kept my rifle across my knees, safety off. The tight space put me closer to him than I wanted. In the dim light, I saw his face better now. His eyes never blinked, not once in the whole time I watched him. And looking at his uniform, I noticed it had no unit patches or insignia of any kind. Just plain olive drab, clean in some spots, dirty in others, like pieces from different uniforms sewn together. "Where'd you say you were from?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "I didn't," he replied, his eyes fixed on me. "But originally, Pennsylvania, like you." I never told him I was from Pennsylvania. We talked some about the war, about how long we'd been fighting. I said as little as possible, watching him, wondering who or what I'd really chosen to follow into the darkening forest. I followed Ryden out of the foxhole when morning came. The fog hadn't lifted at all. If anything, it seemed thicker than before. Visibility stayed at around 20 feet, turning the forest into a small bubble that moved with us. The rest of the world might as well not have existed. "I know a route that will get us to American lines," Ryden said, walking ahead of me with those blue-tinged bare feet that somehow showed no signs of frostbite. "We need to head east for about 5 miles, then north." I kept my M1 rifle ready, finger near, but not on the trigger. My doubts about Ryden had only grown overnight. He hadn't slept. Not once did his eyes close during the hours I pretended to doze. Still, he was my only chance of getting back to friendly territory. So I followed about 5 paces behind. "How do you know which way is east in this soup?" I asked, looking up at the white sky. The sun was just a slightly brighter patch of fog. "I've been moving through this area for days," he said without turning around. "You learn to feel the direction after a while." We walked for about an hour when Ryden stopped suddenly. I raised my rifle, but he held up his hand. "It's okay. It's one of ours." A figure materialized from the fog ahead. It was another American soldier, but unlike Ryden, this one wore a gas mask that covered his entire face. The soldier stood perfectly still, head tilted at a strange angle. "This is Kenny Burgess," Ryden said. "He lost his voice to gas exposure last week." Kenny didn't offer a hand or nod. He just stared at me through the round glass eyepieces of his mask. I couldn't see his eyes at all, just black circles where they should be. "Nice to meet you, Kenny," I said, more out of habit than sincerity. Kenny responded by turning his head to look at Ryden. The movement wasn't right. His neck seemed to rotate almost like an owl's, turning nearly 180 degrees without moving his shoulders. The motion made my skin crawl. Ryden and Kenny exchanged what looked like hand signals. Rapid, complex gestures that reminded me more of machine parts moving than human communication. After a few seconds, Ryden nodded. "Kenny says there's a German patrol about a half-mile west. We should move quickly." "How can he know that?" I asked, straining to hear any sounds of movement beyond our little bubble of fog. "Kenny has good ears," Ryden said. Lost his voice, but gained something else. We continued walking, with Kenny now taking point and Ryden walking beside me. I noticed that both men moved without making any sound in the snow. My boots crunched with every step, but theirs might as well have been hovering above the ground. Kenny kept stopping and rotating his head at those impossible angles, as if listening for things I couldn't hear. Each time, Ryden would watch intently. Then they'd exchange more of those mechanical hand signals before changing our direction slightly. By what I guessed was midday, the fog thinned enough that I could see about 30 feet ahead. That's when we encountered 3 more soldiers, all wearing gas masks like Kenny. They appeared suddenly, standing in a small clearing as if they'd been waiting for us. "Ah, good. The rest of our group," Ryden said. "This is Atticus Carlson, Mason Fitzgerald, and Raymond Freeman." None of them spoke immediately. They all stood there, watching me through those same black glass circles. Like Kenny, they wore standard American uniforms, but something about the way the fabric hung on their frames seemed wrong, as if their bodies underneath weren't shaped quite right. "I'm Willie Stevenson, 101st Airborne," I said, keeping my rifle close. Atticus stepped forward. The sergeant's stripes on his arm looked brand new, not frayed or dirty like they should have been after months in the field. "Good to meet you, Private," he said through the mask. His voice had a muffled, metallic quality. "We're survivors from scattered units who banded together after getting separated during the German push. Been holding our own out here for about a week." "Which units?" I asked. Mason laughed. The sound echoed strangely inside his mask, too high-pitched and lasting a beat too long. "Does it matter?" he said. "We're all lost sons of Uncle Sam out here." Raymond, the shortest of the group, kept turning his head like Kenny did, scanning the forest around us. "We need to keep moving," he said urgently. "German patrol coming from the south. I can hear their dogs." I listened but heard nothing except the soft rustle of wind through the pine branches. "How far to our lines?" I asked Atticus. "Another day's march," he replied. "Maybe less if the fog lifts and we can pick up the pace." We started walking again, now as a group of 6. I stayed near the center, with Ryden beside me, Kenny and Raymond up front, and Atticus and Mason bringing up the rear. All 5 of them moved with the same fluid, gliding motion that made no sound in the snow. It was like watching dancers who knew steps I'd never learned. After about 2 hours of walking, I noticed something odd. A fallen pine with 3 branches sticking up like fingers. We'd passed it before, about an hour earlier. I was sure of it. I'd even noticed a helmet hanging from one of the branches, probably left by a soldier who'd lost it in a hurry. 20 minutes later, we came across a distinctive rock formation. 2 boulders leaning against each other like an incomplete triangle. I'd seen that too, not long after we'd met Kenny. "Hey," I said, slowing down. "I think we're walking in circles." The 5 of them stopped simultaneously, turning to face me with an unnatural synchronization. "What makes you say that?" Atticus asked. "That fallen pine back there, we passed it earlier today, and those rocks too." Mason laughed again, that too long, too high sound that made my hair stand on end. "The fog plays tricks on your mind," he said. "Every tree starts looking the same after a while." "No, I'm sure of it. That pine had a helmet hanging from one of the branches." Raymond shook his head. "Impossible. We've been heading due east all day." "Maybe you saw a different tree," Ryden suggested, putting his hand on my shoulder. I had to stop myself from flinching away from his touch. His fingers felt wrong, too hard, like wood rather than flesh. "Look, I know what I saw," I insisted. "It's easy to get turned around in the fog," Atticus said. "Happens to the best of us. Trust me, we're heading in the right direction." I wanted to argue more, but what was the point? I had no compass, no map, and no clue where American lines actually were. They were 5, and I was 1. If they wanted to hurt me, they could have done it already. "Fine," I said, readjusting my pack. "Let's keep going." We walked for another hour. The fog thickened again, reducing visibility to less than 15 feet. My anxiety grew with each step. Something was very wrong with these men, but I couldn't put my finger on what exactly. Their movements, their voices, the way they communicated with each other, it all felt rehearsed, like actors trying to pass as soldiers. Yet I kept following. What choice did I have? To strike out alone meant certain death from exposure or enemy patrols. At least with the group, I had a chance of survival. I told myself they were just strange men made stranger by war, that their oddities were the result of trauma and isolation. But when we passed that same fallen pine with a hanging helmet for a third time, I knew with absolute certainty that they were deliberately keeping me lost. The question was why? I forced myself to stay calm, to not let them see my growing panic. For now, I would play along and look for an opportunity to escape. I stayed with the group, my finger a little closer to the trigger of my rifle, hoping they really would lead me to safety, but preparing for the moment when I might have to save myself. I lay still in the darkness, keeping my breathing slow and regular, eyelids cracked just enough to see through my lashes. The group had settled for the night in a shallow depression between two rock outcroppings. But sleep was the furthest thing from my mind. They thought I was unconscious. Good. Let them think that. The five of them, Ryden, Kenny, Atticus, Mason, and Raymond, gathered in a tight circle about 15 feet from where I lay. Their heads bent close together, shoulders hunched as they whispered among themselves. The sounds that passed between them weren't English. They weren't German either. The syllables had a strange, flowing quality that made the hair on my neck stand up. Ryden pulled something from his pocket, a small, dark object that looked like a pouch made of worn leather. He held it in his palm while the others reached out to touch it one by one, their fingertips brushing its surface with a reverence that reminded me of churchgoers at communion. Even in the dim light, their faces showed an intensity that seemed out of place, almost worshipful. Kenny, still masked like the others except Ryden, ran his gloved finger across the pouch in a pattern, like he was tracing something. Atticus nodded, then Mason. They continued their hushed conversation, occasionally glancing in my direction. I forced my chest to rise and fall with the steady rhythm of deep sleep. After what felt like hours, they broke apart. Ryden tucked the pouch back into his pocket. I kept my eyes nearly closed as he walked past me, his bare feet still showing no signs of frostbite despite the freezing temperatures. I didn't sleep that night. Morning came with no improvement in visibility. The fog hung thick as ever, but with just enough light to see about 30 feet ahead. We moved out in the same formation as before. Me in the middle, Ryden close by, the others spaced around us. My fingers stayed near my rifle's trigger. By midday, we came upon a small clearing. 2 bodies lay sprawled in the snow, American uniforms. "Hold up," I said, breaking formation to approach them. The snow around them was trampled and stained dark. Both men had been dead at least a day. The first soldier lay face up, a ragged hole torn through his chest. The second was curled on his side, half covered in fresh snow. I knelt beside the first body and checked for a pulse out of habit, though his gray skin told me I'd find none. Pulling my glove off with my teeth, I reached for his dog tags. "Daniel Hunter," I read aloud. "Private." He looked young, maybe 20. I shifted to the second soldier and checked his tags. "Tyler Richardson, Private First Class." As I read their names, the others closed in around the bodies. Not to pay respects, to search them. Their movements were quick and practiced, like vultures stripping a carcass. Mason pulled a pack of cigarettes from one pocket. Raymond took a compass and folded knife. Kenny found ammunition and added it to his own supply. Ryden knelt by Richardson. sliding the dead man's watch off his wrist. Then he worked at the soldier's left hand, tugging a gold wedding band from his stiff finger. "What are you doing?" I asked, unable to hide my disgust. Ryden pocketed the ring, his movements unhurried. "Collecting resources." "That's his wedding ring." "Was," Ryden corrected, his accent slipping slightly. "He has no use for it now." "His family might want that," I said. Atticus stepped between us. "We take what we need to survive. That's how it works out here." I looked at the 5 of them, their faces and masks, betraying nothing. I'd seen soldiers take things from the dead before, but never with such cold efficiency. Never wedding rings. "I'll get their tags," I said, pulling the metal identification from both men's necks. "Make sure someone knows what happened to them." None of them responded. They simply finished their grim work and continued walking. That night, I kept the dog tags in my pocket, separate from my own, a reminder of what I'd witnessed. By the 3rd day in this nightmare, the fog had thinned somewhat, allowing occasional glimpses of sunlight. During one such moment, I tracked the sun's position and realized we were heading northwest, away from where American lines should be. "We're going the wrong way," I said, stopping in my tracks. "The sun's over there. We need to head east, not northwest." Raymond immediately tensed, holding up his hand. "German patrol," he hissed through his mask. 5 men, moving parallel to us, about 100 yards that way. He pointed east. I strained to listen, but heard nothing beyond our own breathing. "I don't hear anything," I said. "They're being careful," Atticus explained. "We need to adjust our course to avoid them." This wasn't the first time. Whenever I questioned our direction or suggested we try moving east based on the sun or stars, Raymond would suddenly detect German patrols I never saw or heard. The pattern was too consistent to be coincidence. That afternoon, I pulled out my radio. "We should try to make contact, if we're close enough to our lines." Atticus immediately stepped forward. "Radio silence. Germans have been tracking transmissions." "Just a quick check," I insisted. 5 seconds, tops." "No." Atticus reached for the radio. "I've seen men die from less. Radio discipline, Stevenson." I reluctantly put the radio away. But the incident only confirmed what I already suspected. They were deliberately keeping me isolated. Later that day, we stopped to rest near a fallen tree. I watched as Ryden moved a few yards away, crouching with his back to the group. Something about his movements struck me as odd. I shifted position to get a better view. He was handling ammunition, but not in any normal way. Ryden was removing American rounds from his ammunition pouch and replacing them with bullets I recognized immediately, 8mm Mauser rounds. German ammunition. My stomach dropped. Carefully, I checked my own rifle, making sure the action would work smoothly if I needed it. These weren't lost American soldiers. I didn't know what they were, but they weren't my allies. As we continued our endless march through the forest, everything became clear. The circular route, the fake German patrols, the radio restrictions, the strange language, the looting of dead Americans, the German ammunition. They were keeping me alive for some purpose, leading me deeper into isolation. I needed to escape, and soon. My life depended on it. I ventured out with Ryden to scout ahead that evening. The others stayed behind at the small clearing we'd found, huddled together and talking in that strange language I couldn't place. Ryden had suggested we check what lay ahead, while the rest secured the perimeter. I didn't trust him, not after everything I'd seen, but I went along with it. Maybe this was my chance to get away. We walked in silence for about half an hour. The forest was quiet except for our footsteps, though I noticed again how mine crunched loudly in the snow while his made barely a sound. Eventually, we reached a ravine cutting through the forest floor. A steep drop-off that ran like a scar through the trees. Ryden stopped at the edge and pointed to a faint glow barely visible through the fog. "There, American camp," he said. "We follow this path down. We reach it by morning." The light looked small and steady in the distance, like a lantern or maybe a campfire. A narrow dirt trail wound along the edge of the ravine, heading straight toward the glow. I stepped onto it and moved a few feet forward, watching my footing on the icy ground. Something didn't feel right. The path was too neat, too convenient. The light sat there like bait at the end of a long, dark tunnel. I took another step and pretended to adjust my pack. Without making it obvious, I unhooked my canteen from my belt and let it fall. The metal container tumbled down the slope, bouncing off rocks and frozen earth until it hit something thin, almost invisible, stretched across the path about 20 yards ahead. The world turned to fire and noise. A blast tore through the air where I would have been walking. The explosion pushed hot air against my face as dirt and metal fragments ripped through the trees. My ears rang as I ducked instinctively, though the worst of it had already passed. When I could hear again, I turned back toward Ryden. What I saw wasn't human. His face had changed. His mouth hung open much wider than any normal jaw should allow, showing rows of teeth that looked wrong. Too many, too sharp. His eyes caught the fading light from the explosion and threw it back like a cat's or deer's. Bright yellow circles in the dark. "Most walk right into it," he said. But his voice was different now. The accent he'd been using was gone completely. What came out instead scraped along the bottom of his throat, not quite language. "You were smarter than the others." I raised my rifle and pulled the trigger without hesitation. The bullet hit him square in the chest. He should have dropped. He didn't. He just looked down at the hole in his uniform, then back at me, and made a sound I can only call laughing. But it wasn't laughter like anything human makes. "Run, little soldier," he said, stepping backward into the fog. "The others will enjoy the hunt." I turned and ran in the opposite direction from where we'd come. Behind me, I heard it start. Howls that rose from multiple directions through the trees. Not wolf howls, not human shouts. Something in between that made my skin crawl. The others were coming. I ran until my lungs burned, changing direction when I could, trying to stay quiet whenever I heard them getting close. I crossed a half-frozen creek, hoping the water would hide my trail. I doubled back along my own footprints when I found harder ground. I crawled under fallen trees and through thick bushes to break my path. The sounds would fade, then grow louder again as they picked up my trail. Once, I heard something moving just a few yards away from where I hid under a tangle of roots. Whatever it was made wet. Clicking sounds as it sniffed the air. I held my breath until my chest ached, finger tight on my trigger, until it moved away. I kept my rifle ready, knowing a single shot might attract them, but also knowing it was my only defense. Each time I stopped to catch my breath, I listened for them. They were smart, spreading out to cover more ground, occasionally calling to each other with those strange, high sounds. As night turned toward morning, the fog started to thin. I could make out more of my surroundings now instead of just shadows and shapes. I pushed up a small hill, my legs shaking with exhaustion, and saw something through a break in the trees ahead, the unmistakable boxy shapes of military vehicles. I nearly cried with relief. I forced my numb legs to move, half running, half stumbling toward the vehicles. As I broke through the tree line, several soldiers turned with their weapons up. They lowered them when they saw my uniform. "American!" I called out, my voice cracking from disuse and fear. 101st Airborne. My legs finally gave out as an officer rushed toward me. I collapsed forward, and he caught me before I hit the ground. Later, I learned his name was Lieutenant Jordan Ramirez from the 501st Parachute Infantry Regiment. In that moment, though, all I knew was that I'd made it out alive. The medic wrapped the final bandage around my frostbitten toes while I sat on the edge of the examination table in the medical tent. My body felt heavy with exhaustion, my muscles sore from running and hiding for what seemed like days. The tent was warm compared to the frozen forest I'd escaped from, but I still couldn't stop shivering. "You're lucky," the medic said, packing away his supplies. "Another day out there and you might have lost a couple of toes. Get some rest, drink plenty of fluids." I nodded but didn't really hear him. My mind kept replaying what I'd seen in the forest. Raiden's impossible smile with too many teeth, those yellow eyes that shouldn't exist on a human face. The sounds of those things chasing me through the trees. A nurse brought me clean socks and boots. I put them on carefully, wincing when the fabric brushed against my tender skin. I'd just finished lacing up when a soldier appeared at the tent entrance. "Private Stevenson, Captain Thornton wants to see you right away." The intelligence tent was on the opposite side of the camp. I walked slowly, testing my weight on my injured feet. Soldiers moved around me, going about their duties. Their normalcy seemed strange after what I'd experienced. Did none of them know what was out there in the forest? Captain Theodore Thornton sat behind a folding desk when I entered. He was tall and lean with thinning brown hair going gray at his temples. Wire-rimmed glasses sat on his nose, and he looked up from his papers when I saluted. "At ease, Private." He gestured to the chair across from him. "How are you feeling?" "Better, sir." I sat down, grateful to take weight off my feet. "Lieutenant Ramirez tells me you came out of the forest alone, claiming to have been with a group of soldiers who weren't quite human." His tone was neutral, but I caught the slight pause before his last words. "Yes, sir." I took a deep breath and told him everything. Getting separated from my unit in the fog, meeting Raiden with his bare blue feet in the snow, the silent gas-masked Kenny, and the others who moved without making noise. I described how they'd led me in circles, how they spoke in a language I didn't recognize, and finally, how Raiden had tried to lead me into a trap and transformed into something inhuman when it failed. Captain Thornton listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes. When I finished, he opened a drawer and pulled out a thick folder. "You're not the first, Private Stevenson." He spread several papers across his desk. "In the past 3 weeks, we've had 8 soldiers come out of that section of forest with similar stories. Men traveling alone or in small groups who encountered helpful soldiers who turned out to be something else." I leaned forward, reading the reports upside down. The details varied, but the patterns were the same. Strange soldiers, circular paths, attempts to isolate and trap. "What are they?" I asked. The captain closed the folder. "Our current assessment is that these are German special operations units, possibly working with local collaborators. They've been targeting isolated American soldiers using psychological warfare tactics to disorient and capture them." "Sir, with all due respect, what I saw wasn't human." When Raiden smiled at me, his mouth opened wider then. "Sleep deprivation, extreme cold and hunger can cause hallucinations, Private." He cut in. "The Germans know this. They're exploiting these conditions, using tricks of light, strange sounds, and mind games to break down resistance." The body I found, the dog tags, they were real American soldiers. Yes, we believe they're taking uniforms and identification from captured or killed Americans to help with their disguises. The captain adjusted his glasses. The language you heard was likely a regional German dialect. The silent one in the gas mask may have been injured or disfigured. I wanted to argue. These explanations didn't account for what I'd seen. The way Ryden and the others moved, how they never left tracks in the snow, those teeth, those eyes. But the captain's rational explanation was far more comfortable than accepting what my eyes had shown me. Do you understand, Private? He was watching me closely. Yes, sir, I nodded, not believing a word of it. Good. Get some rest. You'll be assigned to a recovery unit until you're cleared for active duty. I was dismissed. As I walked back to my assigned quarters, I tried to convince myself that the captain was right, that my mind had played tricks on me after days of cold and fear. But I knew what I'd seen. The barracks were quiet when I returned. Most men were on duty, and I had the space mostly to myself. I sat on my assigned bunk and emptied my pockets, taking inventory of what I still had: my knife, a few cigarettes I'd been saving, some matches, the dog tags I'd collected from the dead soldiers in the forest. My fingers brushed something unfamiliar. I pulled out a small leather pouch, dark and worn, tied with a thin cord. My heart jumped into my throat. It was identical to the one I'd seen Ryden pull from his pocket, the one the others had touched with such reverence. How had it gotten into my pocket? I'd never touched it. With shaking hands, I untied the cord and turned the pouch upside down. A single human molar fell onto my palm, yellowed with age, but unmistakably real. Wrapped around it was a small piece of paper. I unfolded it carefully. A list of names was written in neat, precise handwriting. Some were crossed out. Some I recognized from dog tags I'd collected in the forest. And there, near the bottom of the list, was my own name, Willie Stevenson. I dropped the tooth like it had burned me. It clattered onto the wooden floor as I jumped up. My name. My name was on their list. How long had they been watching me? How many others had they hunted? I barely slept that night. Every sound made me reach for my rifle. The tooth and the list sat on the small table next to my bunk, and I couldn't stop staring at them. By morning, I knew I had to show the captain. I found Thornton in the same tent, already working despite the early hour. I placed the pouch on his desk without a word. "What's this, Private?" he asked, reaching for it. "I found it in my pocket yesterday. I never put it there." I watched as he opened the pouch and examined the contents. The change in his face was immediate. The color drained away, leaving him ashen. He stared at the tooth and the list for a long moment, then looked up at me. "Where did you get this?" His voice had lost its professional detachment. "Like I said, sir, it was in my pocket. It's the same pouch I saw Ryden show to the others in the forest." The captain stood abruptly, still holding the tooth and paper. "Wait here." He left the tent without another word. When he returned 15 minutes later, he wasn't alone. 2 senior officers I didn't recognize accompanied him. "Private Stevenson, you will guide a reconnaissance team back to the areas you described. We need to find this foxhole and any other locations where you encountered these individuals." "Yes, sir," I agreed, both relieved and terrified at the prospect of returning to that forest. "The mission leaves at 0800 hours tomorrow. You'll be fully equipped and heavily armed. Your only responsibility is to identify locations." The next 2 weeks passed in a blur. The reconnaissance mission found more than I expected. a cave system filled with evidence of who or what had been hunting in those woods. I spent most days in debriefings, going over maps and locations, trying to remember every detail of my time in the forest. At night, I lay awake in my bunk, thinking about that list of names. Why was I on it? How many others were still out there, marked for whatever fate awaited those who disappeared into the fog? The tooth bothered me most of all. I kept picturing Raiden's impossible smile with too many teeth, wondering if they collected them as trophies or something worse. My physical strength returned gradually. The frostbite healed, leaving only minor damage to 2 toes. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me out of that forest. Something that had marked me. Even surrounded by hundreds of armed soldiers, I kept my rifle close and jumped at shadows. The captain never offered a new explanation for what I'd found. He took my report seriously now, but the official stance remained the same: enemy combatants using advanced psychological warfare. I didn't push for the truth. Part of me didn't want to know. As I regained my strength and prepared to rejoin my unit, one thing became clear. Whatever was hunting in that forest wasn't finished. The pouch in my pocket proved that. They knew my name. They'd marked me somehow. And deep down, I knew that foggy forest held secrets the army wasn't ready to face. Secrets that would haunt me long after the war ended. I joined the heavily armed patrol back to the forest after my recovery. Captain Thornton had assembled a 12-man team, each soldier carrying extra ammunition and grenades. I noticed they all wore crosses or religious medallions outside their uniforms, something unusual for a standard patrol. The captain had briefed us that morning, explaining we were searching for enemy infiltrators using psychological warfare tactics. But the looks exchanged between the senior officers told me they knew more than they were saying. "You sure you're up for this, Stevenson?" Lieutenant Ramirez asked as we prepared to move out. He checked his Thompson submachine gun for the 3rd time. "Yes, sir," I said, though my stomach nodded at the thought of returning to those woods. My feet still ached from the frostbite, but new boots and double layers of socks made walking manageable. We moved through the tree line in a tight formation, nothing like the scattered patrols I was used to. 2 scouts walked 20 yards ahead, while the rest of us maintained visual contact at all times. No one spoke beyond necessary communications. The winter air bit at my face as we trudged deeper into the forest, and I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see Raiden's too wide smile emerging from between the trees. After 4 hours of steady marching, I recognized a cluster of pines ahead. "That's it," I said, pointing. "The foxhole should be just beyond those trees." Captain Thornton nodded and signaled for the men to approach with caution. We surrounded the small clearing where I'd first spent the night with Raiden. The foxhole looked exactly as I remembered it, a dark hole in the white snow. I stood at its edge, recalling how easily I had followed Raiden down into that pit. "Is this where you first encountered the subject?" Captain Thornton asked, using the clinical term he'd adopted for Raiden. "Yes, sir. We spent the night here. He didn't sleep, not once." 2 soldiers carefully examined the foxhole, one lowering himself into it, while the other kept watch. The man inside called up after a minute. "Sir, you should see this." Captain Thornton and I peered down. The soldier was pointing at the walls of the foxhole, where dozens of small markings had been carved into the frozen earth. Symbols that resembled no alphabet I recognized. "They weren't there before," I said. "It was too dark for me to see much that night, but I would have noticed these." "They leave signs for each other," Captain Thornton muttered, more to himself than to me. He turned to the radio operator. "Note the location and these markings. We're moving on." We continued deeper into the forest, following a path that seemed too direct, too purposeful to be natural. The trees grew thicker, crowding together until they blocked most of the winter sunlight. Shadows stretched across the snow, and every snap of a twig made my hand tighten on my rifle. "Look ahead," one of the scouts called back. "There's some kind of opening in the rocks." We approached what appeared to be a small cave entrance, partially hidden by fallen trees and brush. It seemed deliberately concealed, with branches arranged to break up its outline from a distance. The captain ordered 4 men to secure the perimeter, while the rest of us prepared to enter. "Stevenson, stay close to me," Captain Thornton said, clicking on his flashlight. "You might recognize something important." The cave entrance was narrow, forcing us to enter single file. The air inside was strangely warm compared to the winter forest, and an odd smell hung in the darkness, like wet earth mixed with something metallic and sweet. Our flashlight beams cut through the blackness, revealing a space about the size of a small barracks room. What we found inside made my blood run cold. Neatly stacked against one wall were American and German uniforms. Dozens of them, some still caked with dried blood. Helmets were arranged in rows, many with bullet holes, or worse. Dog tags hung from a string stretched across the cave like a clothesline, tinkling softly as our movement disturbed the air. "My God," Lieutenant Ramirez whispered beside me. I walked toward the dog tags, my flashlight beam trembling slightly as I moved it across the metal rectangles. So many names. So many men. I recognized 2 immediately. Daniel Hunter and Tyler Richardson, the dead soldiers I'd found in the snow. "Sir," I called to the captain, "these are from the men I found dead in the forest." But those weren't the only familiar names. As I continued reading, I found the names of men from my own unit who had gone missing over the past weeks. Against another wall were personal items. Wallets, photos, letters from home, watches, rings, all sorted and organized with disturbing precision. These weren't trophies collected haphazardly. This was a methodical collection. "Captain, you need to see this," one of the soldiers called from deeper in the cave. We followed his voice to a narrow passage that led downward. The captain hesitated only briefly before leading us through. The passage opened into a larger chamber that stole my breath away. The walls were covered in markings, the same strange symbols I'd seen in the foxhole. But here they formed elaborate patterns that seemed to flow and pulse in the moving flashlight beams. The symbols were drawn in something dark brown that flaked away when touched. I didn't want to think about what it might be. In the center of the chamber stood a stone table, its surface smooth and slightly concave. Around this table, covering the ground in careful arrangements, were hundreds of human teeth. They formed spirals, circles, and other patterns I couldn't comprehend. Each pattern seemed to lead toward the table, like rivers flowing to the sea. "They're ritual sites," Captain Thornton said, his voice tight. "We've found 3 others like this, but none this elaborate." I stared at the teeth, remembering the molar in the leather pouch, the list of names that included my own. My name had been among those marked for this place. If I hadn't escaped. The military police arrived within hours. They photographed everything, collected samples, and documented the site with the efficiency of men who had done this before. I watched them work, answering questions when asked, but mostly standing back, trying to process what we had found. As they prepared explosives to seal the cave, Captain Thornton pulled me aside. "What you've seen today is classified, Stevenson. You understand that, right?" "Yes, sir. But what were they?" Who were they? The captain's eyes met mine, then moved away to watch his men work. The official record will show we discovered a German special operations outpost used for psychological warfare and intelligence gathering. And the unofficial record, sir? He checked to make sure no one was within earshot. There are things in these forests older than this war, older than any war. Things that have learned to adapt, to hunt in new ways as humans evolve. He paused. Your report helped us find this place, Stevenson. You may have saved many lives. The explosives detonated as we reached a safe distance, sending a plume of dirt and rock into the air. The sound echoed through the forest, but I took no comfort in it. Caves can be reopened. Things can be rebuilt. 2 days later, I rejoined my original unit. Many faces were missing, casualties of the ongoing offensive. But Sergeant Roger was still there, his familiar scowl somehow the most welcome sight I'd seen in weeks. Stevenson, he said, looking me over with critical eyes. Heard you got yourself lost in the woods. Yes, Sergeant, I replied, unable to explain more due to the classification of what I'd seen. Well, you're back now. We've got a war to win. He hesitated, then added gruffly, Good to see you in one piece, kid. For the rest of the war, I never saw Raiden or any of the others again. Perhaps the cave had been their only nest in the area, or perhaps the explosion had driven them deeper into hiding. Whatever the case, I took no chances. I avoided patrolling alone, always made sure I knew exactly where my unit was, and steered clear of foggy forests whenever possible. When the fog rolled in, I stayed put, no matter the circumstances. Better to face reprimand than what waited in the mist. The war eventually ended. I went home to Pennsylvania, got married, found work at the steel mill, and had 2 children. Life settled into peaceful routines that helped push the memories of the forest further into the back of my mind. Years passed. My children grew. The nightmares came less frequently. Then, 15 years after the war, I received a letter in my mailbox. No return address, no postmark. Just my name written in neat, precise handwriting that seemed too perfect to be human. Inside was a photograph of my house, taken from across the street, showing my wife gardening in the front yard and my children playing on the lawn. On the back, written in the same meticulous hand, were 4 words. The fog always returns. I burned the photograph immediately, watching the paper curl and blacken in the sink. That night, I installed 3 new locks on each door. I checked every window twice. I took my service pistol from the back of my closet and kept it in my bedside drawer. For the rest of my life, I kept that pistol close. I installed more locks, then an alarm system when they became available. I watched the weather reports with particular attention to fog forecasts. And on cool autumn mornings, when mist settled over our quiet neighborhood, I sat by the window, coffee in one hand, pistol in the other, watching for movement in the white haze that drifted between the houses like hungry ghosts. The fog always returns, and I knew, with cold certainty, that somewhere within it, they were still watching, still waiting, and they remembered my name.